Not annoying.
So the charity's mission is to close the gap between non-Indigenous and Indigenous education.
Yep.
So what exactly is the gap?
The gap that exists?
Yeah.
Well, that's obviously a really big question in terms of the gap. There's a range of social disadvantage in Indigenous communities and in Indigenous Australia, between Indigenous Australians and non-Indigenous Australians. But what we focus on is education and the gaps that exist in purely in education. So that's not to discount employment and health and incarceration and infant mortality rates and all those sort of things, but we focus on education. So what we focus on is attendance, Year 12 completion, literacy, and classroom behaviour. Our immediate short-term goal is to continue to work with our 4 partner communities and to continue to get strong outcomes within those communities. We've been working with Palm Island since 2008, which I mentioned before. With our 3 new communities, that goes back to last year, so it's within the last 12 months. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of continuing to cement those programs in those new communities and to look at getting the sort of outcomes that I spoke about at the start of this conversation, which are sort of generational sort of issues. So in the immediate term, sort of over the next 2 years, that's our focus, to continue to work and to develop and to expand is the wrong word, but to develop, I guess is the right word, in our community and to continue to get better outcomes in those 4 categories that I mentioned. Beyond that, once we feel as though we're really successful and solid across the 4 communities, our next step would be to look at working with other remote Indigenous communities. So that's sort of what will take place over the next 5 to 10 years. How many additional communities, I don't know, but we will definitely look at continuing to expand and continue to take our model, which is working with remote communities, taking that model to other remote communities around the country. Measure, go back to what I was talking about before, we look at attendance levels, we look at literacy levels, we look at Year 12 completion levels, and we also look at participation rates, so the number of students who are actually participating in our programs, and we look at the broader engagement of the community. So by that I mean particularly parents and carers. The more involved you get the families and the parents of students in the programs, the greater results you're ultimately going to get with the students. So there's sort of the 5 things we measure: attendance, literacy, Year 12 completion, community parental engagement and overall participation rates. And we also measure sort of anecdotally, it's a hard thing to measure like I said before, but also classroom behaviour, so how the students are behaving in class. Our job is to assist with closing the education gap, and obviously it's our mission one day that there won't be a gap in education between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students in terms of those outcomes and more broadly across all education outcomes. So it's not really us achieving it, it's us as a nation and us as a collective looking at achieving these outcomes. In terms of when that will be achieved, I think it's realistically, I think it's a generational outcome, and it's something that needs to be looked at in terms of a full generation as opposed to a shorter period of time. But the challenge of what we're trying to achieve in itself, which is to assist with closing that education gap in those areas, is our greatest challenge, because as you guys would know, and I'd encourage you to after this to go away and look at some of those statistics, which I've just sort of said off the top of my head, around attendance and Year 12 completion and literacy levels and all the NAPLAN stuff, which I'm sure you guys are probably aware of with your studies. If you look at those gaps, that's the challenge, because you're looking at Indigenous kids that are significantly below non-Indigenous students in terms of those levels. So when you really sort of, I guess, look into that even further, probably the greatest challenge that presents itself is attendance levels and students not going to school regularly. So in remote communities where we work, you can have periods of time where you might get an attendance levels of around 50% or even lower. So if only 50% of kids go to school regularly, your outcomes and your ability for kids to do well in school and reach up year levels of secondary school are going to be severely diminished. So they're our real challenges in terms of what we're trying to achieve. Well, I think probably our biggest achievement has been our capacity to successfully implement key education programs in our 4 partner communities, and to get the engagement and the buy-in from those 4 communities. So as we are now at a stage whereby we are accepted, we're entrenched, we're a part of those communities in terms of their day-to-day life. And so we're there, we're delivering, we're accepted, we're
making a difference.
And so and from that, we're creating outcomes. But the real challenge in this area is to be able to go into those communities and to be able to establish your programs and to get that broad acceptance from throughout the community.